Thank you for that very fulsome introduction, Derek. I'd perhaps like to begin by paying tribute to GALHA's work over the last 30 years. It has been a constant voice for reason, for evidence-based politics, against superstition, standing firm against all manner of religious superstition, prejudice and bigotry. And I think that without GALHA's work, we would have never had such a strong and informed LGBT movement when it comes to the need to challenge religious fundamentalism in all its guises. So a big thank you to GALHA and everybody that has been involved in that organisation over the years, because you have really made a very major contribution to challenging what is, in the world today, the single greatest threat to women's rights and to LGBT women's rights, namely religious fundamentalism. I was asked to talk about the Gay Liberation Front and the reflections on the 40th anniversary of Stonewall. So I suppose a good point to start is to say that, of course, as we have recently celebrated this very important milestone anniversary of the Stonewall riots in New York in 1969, we should of course always remember that the riots themselves, although heroic and inspirational, were not really the most important thing. It was what came out of those riots that has been the lasting legacy for our communities in the United States, Britain, and indeed worldwide. And to me, what was really important that came out of the Stonewall riots was the formation of the Gay Liberation Front in New York very soon afterwards, and the spread of that movement, that new political consciousness, that new LGBT agenda, not only throughout the United States, but indeed throughout the world. And of course it came to Britain a year later. It was on October 1970 that the London Gay Liberation Front was formed. I think we all know and respect that, of course, the Gay Liberation Front was not the beginning. It was the beginning of a new agenda, but it was not the beginning of the movement of which we are now part. There were before the GLF, the Campaign for Homosexual Equality, and before it, of course, the Homosexual Law Reform Society and the Northwest Homosexual Law Reform Committee. And I would like to take this opportunity to pay a great tribute to the real pioneers of our community and movement, people like Alan Horsfall, Anthony Gray, Jackie Forster, Griff Vaughan-Williams, and indeed many, many others who laid the foundations of where we have now progressed to today. So, but I would say that in contrast to that earlier generation of homosexual law reformers, the Gay Liberation Front did rewrite the rules. I have absolutely no doubt that individuals within those earlier movements took brave, courageous and sometimes public stands. But the Gay Liberation Front was the first time that hundreds, even thousands of LGBT people came out and marched in the streets to demand our human rights. And that was a very, very different ideological and political agenda and way of operating. It was also very different because the Gay Liberation Front, whether you agree or not, had a revolutionary agenda. You know, it saw itself as part of the sort of 1960s and post-1960s social movements for liberation and freedom. It was the successor or follow-on in many ways of the Black Liberation Movement and the Women's Liberation Movement. This was an agenda for radical, fundamental social change. The Gay Liberation Front was very much allied with black and women's organisations in this country and indeed around the world. I can recall that when the black activists who were framed, the Mangrove Nine in Notting Hill, I think the Gay Liberation Front was the only non-black organisation that turned up to support them in their fight when the protest took place. Likewise, when the Women's Liberation Movement had those spectacular protests against the Miss World contests at the Royal Albert Hall, it was pretty much only the Gay Liberation Front that turned up in solidarity. And what a night that was. All the great and the good turned up in their Bentleys and Rolls Royces to be greeted by an alternative Miss World on the pavement outside. We had misused, misconceived, mistreated, and we also had Miss Bangladesh, starving, emaciated, and of course swathed in bandages from the then bloody war that was being waged by Pakistan against the newly independent nation. And we had Miss Ulster as well, likewise bloodied and bandaged from the actions of the British Army in the north of Ireland. It was a truly glorious, truly spectacular alternative Miss World. And that was just part of the ethos of those times. You know, there were no boundaries. There was no question of playing the game by the rules. This was about shaking up the establishment, metaphorically grabbing it by the throat and announcing that we were here, we were queer, we were proud, we were not going away, and we were unafraid of anyone.